Good morning. Hope you've all had a great 2021 season. It's now December 1st. We got a month left. I apologize. I have not done any tying videos in quite some time. It's been several months. I want to say probably close to 10. But, that's the life of a commercial tire. And I like to fish a lot too. And I actually did some guiding this year. Kind of on my own terms. We got kind of lucky. We had a lot of water this year, so I was able to put the boats and stuff in and basically take people on some floats. Some of my favorite streams fished fantastic this year. I was just scrolling through the photos in the iPhone the other day, and the numbers of big fish that we got on a lot of, not just the normal rivers, but a lot of the other ones that are a little lesser known was lights out. Sorry to rant. I'm going to rant about some stuff here, but I know some of you, that's all you tune into. There's definitely some things that need to be fixed on some of our other fisheries in the state of Connecticut, aside from the main focal point. I know there's some other groups that are working on some things, but we really need to spread out the fishing pressure by looking at ways to better some of these other fisheries. But I'm sure that's kind of how it is across the United States and other places too. But lots of flies. You kind of see me in and out on Instagram with stuff. It's really funny watching the trolls on there. I kind of got a kick out of it, and I love the fact that I'm actually taking real estate in some people's heads. But I don't revel in that. But it's just I just can't wrap my head around the nonsense and the stupidity with it. A lot of the good stuff that social media does is vastly overshadowed by the nonsense and the constant, people trying to get one over on somebody, or Joe Rogan had a pretty funny term. Everybody's trying to dunk on somebody else. Yeah. Being a person that used to dunk basketballs in high school, I know how that must feel for those of you that don't know how to do that and you feel like you've accomplished something, but it really accomplishes nothing. But yet I digress. Been called all kinds of funny names on there by even some locals, which cracks me up. Bully, tough guy, completely not the case. I just think the people that are throwing those comments out there completely misunderstand where I'm coming from with certain things. So I'm going to address the elephant in the room. I've opted to do this in person with some people, but they've declined to do that. Listen, I'm a very reasonable person. I'll admit when I'm wrong. I know when I've done things that are probably not right, and I'll own up to my mistakes. Many of you who know me pretty well know that. I don't have any access to grind with people. But when you're passionate about something, there's always going to be people that don't like you. My parents told me that early on in my life, that certain things, not everyone's going to like you for what you do, and I'm completely fine with that. So the biggest thing that a lot of people have a problem with is the fact that I've hitched my wagon to the idea of not fishing to spawning trout. And there's a few people, even a manager of a shop who I'm friends with, who feels the same way I do, but he won't express his concerns on it, because everybody kind of has your own choice. And I'm not telling you what to do here either. Everybody's can make their own choices, but I'm just trying to get some people to think about things from a different perspective. Full disclosure, when I was in my early 20s, I fished over spawning trout. It was like shooting fish in a barrel. Very, very easy, to be quite honest with you. As long as you had the right color egg pattern, you pretty much could blow them up. But what I slowly realized, and that same person who's a manager in that shop said to me, he goes, doesn't really feel that it's sporting. And you know what? That really stuck with me, because I like to think I have some ethics and some morals. And to be quite honest with you, ever since that day, that season, I haven't done it again, because I just don't feel that it's right. And listen, if you partake in that adventure, God bless you, you do your thing. I'm not here to point fingers and whatnot. I just want you to hear my point of view. And I know I'm going to get some negative comments on this, and that's completely fine. I'm fine with that. I have thick skin. Type away. I don't erase people's negative comments because it hurts my feelings. I leave them up there. So if you scroll back through anything that I've ever written, you don't see me going out there and erasing it or not allowing people to comment. You know, good, bad, or indifferent. It is what it is. I'm slowly to the point now where I just don't think I'm going to fish for trout pre-spawn, during the spawn, and probably for a bit after. You know, that's a personal choice. There's so many other things that I can chase that time of year. Typically I'm in the salt water. It is what it is, but I'm going to talk about a couple things here. I think there's something that totally just gets completely glossed over and nobody's willing to talk about it. You know, the biggest thing that people talk about when fishing over spawning fish, oh, you're really not stressing them out. Okay, yep, you could debate that. There's really no studies on whether it is or not. But as long as you're not walking through the reds or the eggs, the nests where they lay their eggs, everything should be fine. To a degree, I will partially agree with that. You know, if you educate yourself and you recognize where a fish is spawning, and you probably don't want to walk through that because there's studies that show anytime you walk through there, you disturb those eggs, the probability of those eggs actually coming to fruition and turning into fish drastically decreases. So yes, you're absolutely right. You could use the mindset that as long as I don't walk through a trout red, I'm okay. But I'm going to take it a step further. The thing that doesn't get talked about at all is, and I can speak from experience on this, I'm sure many of you out there know exactly what I'm talking about. When you catch a fish during that time of year, and I apologize for my furnace, you know, I'm kind of in a basement here, that's where my shop is. When you catch a fish, a female specifically, that is full of eggs, what happens to that fish when you handle it? While you're fighting it, it's in your net. Maybe you've taken it out for a picture. It's spewing eggs everywhere. You can quantify that loss by whatever pile of eggs is just falling out of that fish. Those are eggs now that absolutely will not get fertilized to potentially turn into future trout. Now, you can quantify that. You can say whatever you want about your fish handling and you don't take them out of water. But when you're fighting those fish, you can't tell me that they're not dumping eggs. You can see what just happened with all the eggs that you just basically inadvertently forced that fish to dispel from their body. And we all know that every single one of those eggs, the probability of those being fertilized and actually turning into fry, smolt, moving up through the whole chain of turning into an adult fish is very, very low. So, you know, out of the hundreds and hundreds, maybe even thousands of eggs that a trout actually has that even get into a red, a small percentage of those actually really make it. So if you can quantify that fact that you just allowed that fish to dispel its eggs, which you've put it under undue stress, it's the same thing with the males. I mean, when you pull the males out that time of year, they're ready to do their business, they're milting sperm and everything everywhere. You can't tell me that that's not having a negative impact on them. I mean, how can it not be? So you choose to do what you want. You know, and I'm sure everybody's going to be out there saying I'm virtue signaling and all this other nonsense with these stupid terms that have come up in this woke cancel culture nonsense world we live in now. I really don't care. That's my view. It's my opinion. That's what I'm putting out there. If you don't like it, turn it off. But think about it. That's all I ask. It has nothing to do with I'm right, you're wrong. It's just something to think about. Listen, everybody I know that fishes, I'd like to think, cares about the places that they fish. And even more so, in a recent study, in a poll, because the state of Connecticut's actually doing a 10-year wild trout program, where they're looking to try and boost wild stocks, that's one of the biggest things that was written repeatedly in those polls, was people would like to see more wild fish. What better way to do that? I could get into a multitude of other topics on it. Hey, certain states are really good about closing fisheries during the spawn. Connecticut, I don't see that happening for a while. We've tried. The topic's been brought up, but it gets a ton of pushback. Heck, the nearby state of New York has already rolled back their closures on a lot of their rivers and open their stuff up all year. And I'll be the first one to tell you, I used to be all about that. All season long open trout fishing. Why not, right? But you know what? Now that I'm older, maybe a little bit wiser, I don't know, some people argue stupid. I have no idea. But I think a little differently about it now. I think maybe, it's probably a good thing. There's a noticeable difference when those fish are less pressured as to how they behave, how they react, and the kind of shape they look in. Now you add that into the whole, idea of them trying to procreate so that we have more wild stocks. I mean, why wouldn't you want to do more to protect that? But enough of my rant. I'm sorry if you don't like it, you can tune me out. I really don't care. I think the best video I saw in the last few weeks, Kelly did it, and kudos to him. He says, hey, I'm going to show you how to fish a red. Shows a picture of a couple of fish on a red, and then he walks away. It takes a lot to say something like that, but he's probably right. You make the decision. At any rate, so, I like tying streamers and fishing streamers and whatnot. It's probably one of the things I'm most passionate about in fly fishing. Just, it is what it is. There's been I had some questions in the last year about, do you have any good articulated guide flies or easier patterns that don't require a lot of technique that a beginner could tie? Well, I'm here to tell you I got a great one here for you. This is one that my good fishing partner Greg has gotten to experience firsthand. He got to see how effective this little simple fly is a couple of times this year, especially for smallmouth. If you like to fish for smallmouth, which I always get a kick out of the trout guys who poo-poo smallmouth and call them trash fish and whatnot. Completely disagree. No fish is trash fish. Alright. This particular pattern's a real easy tie. It's entirely synthetic. We're going to tie this guy today. I call it the dumpster dinner. It's just another craft fur based fly. There's a bunch of good craft fur patterns out there. Charlie Craven's Conga. God, for the life of me, what's his name? I can't even think right now. He's not even in the scene that much anymore, but he does some he's from Utah. Somebody will remember. Maybe you can make it in the comments. I know Matt knows who he is. They're really good friends. He does a phenomenal craft fur pattern out there. He's kind of migrated away from us lunatics in the fly fishing world and gone back to conventional tackle. I kind of don't blame him. But craft fur is a really cool material, and people are looking for something simple. The basis of this particular fly that we're going to tie today it's the same simple techniques throughout the entirety of it. An absolute beginner could effectively learn how to tie this relatively easy, and you'll see today when I demonstrate it. But you'll see with craft fur, and I'll talk about in the tying sequence, the biggest thing, I see a lot of pretty flies on the internet, but a lot of them lack a lot of function, because just because a picture of a fly dry doesn't mean it looks great, doesn't mean it's going to behave the way you think it's going to in the water. Even more so with multi-section flies, which, I'm kind of beating a dead horse with that topic. But craft fur, because it's so thin and doesn't have a lot of mass and body to kind of maintain its shape, you really have to do a lot of other things to it, behind it, spreaders, bulkier materials to maintain profile. And for a fly like this that I want to maintain, like a bait fish style profile, there's some things I need to do. I'm going to show you in this video how to make a very fast internal spreader with something you probably never even would have thought of using. And it's super quick and easy, and you don't have to use UV resin. Same thing, got some hate on that too. Oh, it's the guy that was barking about UV resin. Well, yeah, when your face, swells up and you've got open sores and nonsense in your nose and eyes and irritation and your eyes closed, it's probably a quick key to tell you that you probably should stop using that stuff. So I've resorted back to a lot of other things. I use a lot of water-based products, lots of Loon, soft head, hard head, liquid fusion, things of that nature, and just regular old super glue. I'm going to show you a trick with this stuff today. But enough of me talking and running my mouth. I'm sure you've had enough, and we'll get to tying. Alright? So here we go. Okay, so we're going to start our tying sequence here for the dumpster dinner. And while we're going through this, I'll talk you through everything. This is legit 4 materials, and all 4 materials, with the exception of the craft fur, are going to be tied the same pretty much. So you have craft fur, extra select in yellow. We're going to use an EP craft fur brush. This one's yellow and red. Just like the fly I showed you there, I'm going to tie the same color. Polar reflector flash. This is in rust. It kind of gives you that nice red color. And then the last brush right here is the anadromous brush. So like I told you, this is pretty much a guide fly. Super easy. Doesn't require a lot of tying skill for you to replicate this, and you can tie a really cool fly, kind of a guide streamer. Use whatever thread you want. I'm actually using a 210 or 140 yellow Danville, but any of them will work. Pick the color of thread that you like. That's gonna work with the color scheme that you decide to tie this in. And if you've seen them on my webpage, it's kind of sketchy, but pulling them out of a plastic bag. You know, black and orange. This one's banged up. It's been fished. Black and orange. I mean, the sky's the limit in colors here, folks. I mean, you got tan and yellow, which is killer, by the way. Tan and yellow. That's a fished one. I mean, I got a tan and olive. They're all bunched up. You know, black, purple, all black. This dark olive one right here, pretty money. You can go all white if you want. You know, there's the black and purple. People really love. There's the all black. Here's that olive and tan. This is another really good color scheme too. Olive and tan. You know, yellow. Black and yellow. I mean, I have this gray and white's really killer too. You know, and then you can get crazy with it. I'll show you at the end, but you can put eyes on these things if you want. They don't necessarily need it. Some of the ones that I tie, I've tied several for a couple of shops. I'll actually use synthetic jungle cock. Tan and brown. It's killer. And yeah, I do have Ziploc bags of flies in my person when I'm fishing. If you're in my boat, you'll understand. I always tie a little bit the night before. So, hook in the vise right here. This is an Airex TP610 Trout Predator. Number 2. The front hook is going to be the same, which is a number 1. You could go up to a 1/0, and then you got a little bit better of a taper. That's completely up to you. It all depends on how big of a profile you want to make here. So what we're going to do is we're going to go right into this craft fur. There's a million different ways you can do this. You can cut a section with the carpeting on it if you want, but what I typically like to do, I don't know if you can kind of see it here, is I take my scissors and I just go in and I pull out the section that I need, just like so. And then I grab it in my hand and I cut it as close to that height as I possibly can. And then I transfer it to my hand. What you're going to do is, I use a flea comb for this. I'm going to comb out all that under fur. We don't want that for this. Beauty of this fly too is there's not a lot of weight to it, so the weight of the hooks are going to keep it keeled because the fly is virtually weightless. So I want to take out all that extra nonsense that I don't need when I tie it. So I do that. See how long I want my tail, and before I do anything, while holding it in place, I come right in here and I just clip off the butt ends of that craft fur. So that way when I go to wrap, as you'll see here, I'm going to have a nice even underbody. And my first few wraps are going to be, my first one's relatively tight, a couple right there, and I'm just going to spiral wrap over everything. That's going to evenly distribute that craft fur around the hook. If it's not precisely how I want it, I can manipulate it now because my thread tension is relatively light. Listen, there's all these crazy things. This is another rant, just so you know. You guys all know my take on stuff. There's some tremendous amounts of cool new gear out there. You got bobbins that cost $100 that tension the thread for $40. That's complete nonsense. You should pick up, when you're new to tying, the best thing you can do, one of the most important aspects of tying sound flies is knowing how to control your thread tension, because that's going to dictate how you can manipulate, position, move, reposition materials on the hook. You don't need any of the other stuff. It's going to give you a false sense of reality. And also, some of the materials we have now, like this Vivas thread, it's amazing stuff. It's freaking so much more stronger than everything else. it actually does you a disservice if you're a new tire because it gives you a false sense of reality of what the braking strength is on average threads. I digress. I will never leave these Griffin bobbins. I love them. So as I was saying, if you've got limited amount of pressure on here, you can kind of manipulate this before you really lash it down. And I'm just going to come back over that material, as you see here, with some tighter wraps. If you want, you can put a half hitch in there right now because I am going to use the rotary function on this fly. I'm going to take a small section. I'm just going to cut this so I don't deal with having the stuff everywhere. Small section of that rust-colored polar reflector flash, okay? Now, when I tie this in, you can kind of see the material is leaning rearward towards the rear of the hook. That's the way I want to tie it in because I'm going to be wrapping it forward. If I tie it the other way, I'm going to be fighting it and it's not going to wrap properly. Easiest thing you can do too is come right in here, just clip away some of that excess material there, and then we're just going to kind of bind that end and then work our thread right up to about the point where I stopped that there. That's a reference point, okay? You can see it's probably about 1.5 lengths back from eye lengths back from the eye of the hook. Now you can kind of see here, if you look at this very closely, I've got a gap here that's roughly the eye width from the base of the craft fur to where I tied in this chenille. And I'm going to wrap this by hand. I said I was going to use the rotary function, but I'm going to wrap this by hand. Reason being is I want this to kind of lay. When this stuff is palmered and wrapped through here, I don't want it right up against this. I want it to kind of lay where the ends of the fibers are right about here on the tail. You can see that. And you don't need to do tight spiral wraps on this. In fact, you want these kind of loose and open. This is the rear portion of the fly. You want a little less material on there. If you wrap too much on here, it's going to look like a peanut, and that's not how we want this fly to taper. It's going to jack up the profile. Couple turns over, couple turns in back, and then I'm just going to wrap right over the butt ends of that. If you want, this is a great time to take out your little wire brush if you have one. I highly suggest you keep one of these in your vest or your boat bag or whatever if you're deciding to fish these style of flies, just for the simple fact that, you know, sometimes a fish can get these things all twisted up and all these little fibers will kind of knot together and whatnot. And the easiest way to keep them or get them back into shape and less unruly is to use some sort of a brush on them. So now what I'm going to do, I'm going to take that red and yellow craft fur brush, peel some of the fiber away from the stainless steel wire. And if you haven't broken down and gotten some, get yourself a pair of wire cutters. I only need about 1/8 of an inch. I'm going to tie that in on the near side. Just lash that right down, right behind the eye. And then I'm going to preen these fibers. This brush is a little bit bent and banged up. I'm going to take roughly 3 or 4 turns of this material. It's relatively sparse. The red synthetic material, it's EP fiber that's in the middle of this, is a stiffer style of synthetic with yellow craft fur wrapped around it. And that's going to give it a little bit of a spine, so it's going to maintain some of its shape. If you just did a craft fur brush with nothing like that in it, it would just, when it gets wet, it would just become paper thin. Once I've done that, I'm going to brush this out a little bit. Peel the thread head. Then you can do your how many turn whip finish you want on there. You can whip it by hand, whip it with a tool. It's entirely up to you. I use both. I think you should learn how to use both. Once that's in place, take our head cement, whatever you want to use. If you still like to use UV resin, have at it. Glue that stuff in place. Take my piece of wire, like we always do, run it through here, work with the curve, bring it through, pull it tight, take it out of the vise. I'm going to put my one red bead in there that matches my core of this fly. Cinch it down like so. Once I've got that in place, and number 1, start a course of thread from the hook eye right to the point where the bend starts. Gonna fix my tail. Line my 2 wires up like I always do. Reference some of my old videos. 3 turns. Keep a little bit of a loop there. That's gonna help make this fly swim. And then first course of thread. Relatively loose wraps to bind it down all the way up and over. Work back. As you can see, I've increased the thread tension all the way back to the starting point. Come forward again, a little bit more thread tension, and then reverse it all the way back with the most amount of thread tension you can put on there, and then half hitch it. Get yourself a material clip, pop it in there, and now the sequence here is going to start from where we kind of left off. What you're going to find here, like I said, we're basically just wrapping material onto this hook. That's it. It's super easy. You know, before they made brushes like this, you'd have to build them yourself. So we're going to take that same brush, cut the fibers away from the wire. We're going to take about 3 or 4 turns here of this material, and while doing so, I'm going to pull the material rearward. 2, 3. Take your scissors, go right in there like so you can separate that material from the fiber. Take 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 over, 1, 2, 3 in front. Grab your wire cutters so you don't wreck your good scissors. Clip it off. Take your thumbnail or your scissors and flatten that steel burr down, and then go back over it just so slightly. Take your little brush there. I can get rid of that craft fur brush. Take your brush, brush that out. That's just going to be filler, what I like to call it. Same sequence, go right back to your polar reflector flash. Trim some of the fibers off so you're right down to the bare core. We're going to tie this in right at the base of that this time. No gaps. And we're going to run that to a point right about, and I'm going to put a half hitch here because I don't want this to come undone. I would say that's roughly, yeah, probably about 1/3 the length of the hook shank. Now we're going to actually wrap this tightly. So each turn is going to be in consecutive wrap so that it's right there next to and on top of it. Not on top of it, but right next to and adjacent to the last turn. Once you get to the thread, take your fingers, as you see here, you can pull any fibers out that are kind of trapped and then brush them rearward. Take your thread, work it through there. Do 1 turn, 2 turns, 3 turns, 1, 2, 3 in front. Trim it. Boom. Wrap over the butt ends, and if you want, you can put a half hitch on there. Now, here's the fun part. So what we're going to do, we're going to build a reverse tied bundle of craft fur. So take a very generous amount this time. As much, if not more, probably half as much more of what you took for the tail. Brush out all that fuzz that's in the under fuzz there. Now we're going to take and measure this. Now I want this whole thing to blend into that. To make sure this is even, I'm just going to cut that flat so I have a flat section there. And just like we do in the headbanger, the hog snare, the alter ego, we're going to take this bundle, we're going to lay it right on top, reverse, roll it around with your fingers, and we're going to build. First 2 turns are going to be light wraps. A couple more. We're going to build a little bit of a thread collar right here. Okay, some of this stuff's going to fall out. Okay, push that forward a bit. Now what we're going to do right here, and this is important, is we're going to take some Zap-A-Gap. Okay. What I like to do is, it's a little easier to apply with a brush, but for the time being and the sake, I'm going to take the tip of this. Now, alright, sorry about that, ran out of battery. So what we're going to do to make this cone here is we're going to use Zap-A-Gap. We're going to put some Zap-A-Gap in that cone. just enough to work it in there. And what we're going to do to speed this up, because you're probably like, oh, this is stupid, it's going to sit here forever, is we're going to actually use an accelerator. When you spray that accelerator in there, it just hardened right up. And it's still a little bit malleable, so what you can do is, if you really have a position that you want this to go in like a bait fish, I kind of like to taper this a little bit so that it's a vertical position like this, kind of like a bait fish and not just a round cone. I'll just take my fingers because it's not going to stick to it now, and that's what I'm going to do right there. Bingo, you can see that dried that glue right out. Once I've done that, then I'm going to take my my super high-tech reverse tying tool, which is nothing more than a pen. There's some things on the market that sell these now, and every one I've used is broken. But just take the innards of a pen, push that material rearward. You're going to see here real quick. But before you do that, what I like to do is make about a thread collar that's about 1/4 of an inch. And you'll see why in a second here. Now to take that, reverse tie it, and you'll see you've basically got a cone under there that's relatively rigid, and it's going to help that fly maintain its shape. Send my thread right through that. So now what I've done is I've basically given that fly some body pretty quickly. Now look, there's 1,000 different ways you can do this. This is just something a little bit different. If you don't want to tie in tubing or anything like that, that's what you can do. The last step in this is to make the head. And what you can do with this, and I'll talk about it briefly, if you really want to make a head that's got lots of different colors to it or different amounts of body, you can use 2 different types of brushes together. This is an anadromous brush. It's about 2.5 inches wide in diameter. I'm going to use that. But if you really wanted to, you could take an 1.5 inch minnow head brush, do the same thing. If you want, you could use laser dub. It's all completely up to you. I'm just trying to show some of the less advanced tires out there, some of you beginners, a really quick way to make a cool and effective articulated streamer. So same thing, I've cut right down to the bare wire, as you see here. I've kind of lashed that in. We're going to burn up a little bit of thread here because we're going to actually make this a thread cone. And once we get it close enough, we'll chase it right up onto that bump of craft fur that we have here. You see here, and we're just going to make a nice smooth thread cone. So what ends up happening is you have this nice cone that goes right back into where your craft fur is. Tie that off. Boom. Now we're just going to take this and wrap this rearward. Every turn you take, preen those fibers backwards, just like you see here. I think it'll take about 6 turns or so. Find your point right up to where your eye or your hook is, as you see here. Run your thread over it once, twice, 3 times. 3 in front. Take your wire cutters, come right in here. Boom, cut that. 0 waste. Flatten that little burr out. Start a thread head. Take your wire brush once again. Comb that out. As you see here. Build a neat little thread head. Same thing, if you really want to, you can do a hand whip finish here, which I'm going to do. It's in place. Bingo. Head cement it. Do whatever you got to do. And your fly is pretty much done. If you really are so inclined and you want to put eyes on here, same thing. You can glue them on like I've done in a few of the other videos, like you see on this particular one here. And then what I would do to make them a little more durable, instead of using UV resin, I'll take soft head and I'll take a small little brush and I'll just brush it over the eye, and then I'll brush that section that's right from here to the eye of the hook with some of that soft head, put in a turning wheel, let it dry, be done with it. And then now you've got this nice tapered fly with a really, really cool, if you look at this, it's got a really good bait fish profile. just like you see here. Sky's the limit on the colors. If you don't like to tie and you want to fish these, I sell these out of the store too. If you really want to get super crazy with it, you can come in here with a big set of scissors and you can kind of trim this head, any of these errant little fibers here and there. But to be quite honest with you, the fish don't care. This fly hovers like crazy in the water column. It's very neutrally buoyant, weighs nothing, and it just dances and does all kinds of cool stuff. This is a really cool fly that you can animate through the current and also through whatever you do with the rod. One of the things I like to do with this, and this is a killer smallmouth fly also, folks, is get this in behind pockets in that slack water where a lot of those smallmouth like to reside, and then I'll just kind of maneuver the fly with the tip of the rod through there, and it'll just come up and inhale it. That's a dumpster dinner. Like I said, sky's the limit in colors. I showed you a whole pile of them. Hope you enjoy it. I'll try and get some more videos to you in the next few months, but I can't make any guarantees there. Have a good one. Have a great holiday.